Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello all. Welcome back to the Truth in My Days Apologetics Program. Today, we have Dr. Adrian Torres speaking with John Torres. Today, John is looking at when the Gospel books were published. We are continuing from the last episode. We hope you enjoy.
You said that the authors of the standard textbook we were mentioning put Mark to the late 50s and Luke to 60. What do they say about Matthew?
Well, actually, this is where the whole thing becomes a mess. You remember that they put Mark into the late 50s because they said they were required to do so since Luke dated to the year 60, since Acts dates to 62, which we agree with. They're correct about that. So they put Luke to 60, and they put Mark, which they believe came first, into the late 50s. So where do you fit Matthew? And even before that, when they discuss Luke, and they look at the dating of Luke, they don't put Luke to AD 60, but they put him into the early 60s. So they put him into the year 60 to set the date of Mark, but then they dispense with that and assign a new date to Luke. And they put him into the early 60s, which becomes a problem as well, because if Acts was published in 62, as they say, and Luke is in the early 60s, what are we talking about? 61? 62? It's published in the same year as Acts? Possibly, but not super likely. So they're really kind of painting themselves into a corner here. And then when they look at Matthew, the only evidence that they appeal to from the church fathers at all is to say that Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria disagreed about whether Peter was alive when Mark was written. So they really can't draw anything from the external evidence. So when it comes to dates for Matthew, all they can do is list a number of subjective suppositions. And they conclude that, quote, the preponderance of evidence suggests that Matthew was published before 70, most probably during the 60s, unquote. And you see the problem here. As when they were dating Mark, the evidence indeed says that Matthew was before 70, but that means it could be anywhere from 33 up to 69. They offer no evidence at all to justify their claim that it was most probably during the 60s. And this is what we see in New Testament scholarship all the time. Ideas are floated, ideas become probably, and then the probably becomes accepted as the fact. And it really is no evidence, no real evidence given for these dates that we see in the standard textbook.
So what is the best estimate for the dates of publication of Matthew, Mark, and Luke when we take into the account all the evidence we have?
Well, we've seen from the internal evidence and that little one piece of external evidence that the Gospel according to Luke was published in the year 54 or earlier, Mark earlier than that, and Matthew earlier still in the 40s or possibly even the 30s. That's where internal evidence took us. Now let's look at the external evidence to see if we can pin the dates down more precisely. A church father, early church father, Clement of Alexandria, wrote this for us. Quote, when Peter had publicly preached the word at Rome and by the Spirit had proclaimed the gospel, those present, who were many, exhorted Mark, as one who had followed him for a long time and remembered what had been spoken, to make a record of what was said, and that he did this and distributed the gospel among those that asked him. And that when the matter came to Peter's knowledge, he neither strongly forbade it nor urged him forward. And that's recorded for us in Historia Ecclesiastica, book 6, chapter 14, section 6 onwards. So according to Clement's testimony, Peter was still alive at this time, but it looks like he's no longer in Rome. He left the church in Rome, and this is why they want a written account of his teachings. So the question becomes, when did he go to Rome? And when did he return from Rome? Well, one idea, and this is backed up by tradition, goes to this. You remember in the book of Acts, chapter 12, this is where Herod has put James, the brother of John, to death. And he saw that it pleased the people, so he arrested Peter. And Peter was going to be put to death as well. He's in a jail. He's chained up. He's got guards around him. The church is having a prayer meeting for him, praying for him. And during the night, an angel appears and miraculously delivers Peter. And Peter goes to the house. He knocks on the door, and one of the girls who checks on him doesn't even think it must be his ghost or something. But he keeps knocking. And we read in verses 16 to 17, now Peter continued knocking. And when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But motioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, go tell these things to James and to the brethren. And he departed and went to another place. Now, interestingly, Peter's been front and center in the book of Acts to this point, into chapter 12. And after he departed and went to another place, he disappears. He doesn't show up again until chapter 15. Now, again, we can piece together the chronology of Acts. And so this, when he left, would be about the year 42. And we're told by Jerome in his Liber Pontificalis that the other place was Rome. This is where Peter went at this point to escape Herod. Herod had no jurisdiction in Rome. So Peter went there, and presumably he would have returned after the death of Herod Agrippa, which was in the year 44. We know he returned at some point between then and 49, because he is there in Acts chapter 15 in the Jerusalem Council, which took place in AD 49. So this information should then help us to pin down the date for Mark.
Wait, this may be what Clement records, but didn't you say the authors of the text say that the testimony is divided? That Irenaeus records that Mark wrote after the deaths of Peter and Paul? That would be a big contradiction, and how could we know who was right?
I did say that. You're correct. And they do claim that. You're correct about that. But in fact, there is no actual contradiction.
No? So why do so many commentators insist that Mark was written after Peter had died, based on Irenaeus?
Well, if you ask me my opinion, I think it's because they wanted to late date these books. The pretext, and if some of them, I think, just accept this in good faith, but haven't bothered to check carefully. Irenaeus, in his book Against Heresies, book 3, chapter 1, writes this: Matthew, indeed, among the Hebrews, in their own dialect, put forth also a writing of the gospel, while Peter and Paul were evangelizing in Rome and founding the church. After the exodus of these, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, also has himself handed on to us in writing the things proclaimed by Peter.
And?
Well, look at the wording. It says, after the exodus of these. And the scholars take it to mean the death of these. They say Exodus refers to the death of Peter and Paul. And so Irenaeus is telling us that Mark published his gospel after the death of Peter and Paul. And sometimes it'll actually be put into the translation, instead of saying after the exodus of these, it says after the death of these. And so somebody reading this in good faith will think, yeah, okay, Irenaeus is saying that Mark came after the death of Peter in 64. And this illustrates, once again, why it's good to know Koine Greek and have the initiative and take the initiative to check these things. So the claim is that after the death of these, the death of Peter and Paul, Mark wrote the book, which will put it after 64, maybe even after 68. Problem with this is that the usual Greek word for death is thanatos. Thanatos. It's not exodus. Exodus literally means a departure, a going away. Now, that's its normal use. Sometimes it is used as a euphemism for death. But the question then is, why do we assume in this passage we should take it as a euphemism for death instead of its normal meaning, departure?
I think there is no reason. Actually, earlier when you read out that part from the early church father saying Exodus, I actually thought it meant they left. So I guess really nobody can argue one way or the other definitively.
Maybe we can. Okay. If we take it as departure, it would mean that what Irenaeus is saying is that after their departure from Rome, and it could be referring to there, could be referring back to Paul and Peter, or it could even be referring to Peter and Mark. And then it fits in perfectly with Clement, because not only does it have Mark publishing while Peter's still alive, but remember the way Clement put it together is that Paul seems to leave Rome and that people want a written record, so Mark offers it. So after their departure from Rome fits in perfectly with Clement.
But can we know which way Irenaeus used the word Exodus here?
Yeah, can we be sure? Well, considering that according to the usual usage, Exodus means departure, the burden of proof would be on those who want to say that it means death. But in this case, we don't have to wonder. A New Testament scholar named E. Earl Ellis actually went through all of the writings of Irenaeus in Greek, in the original Greek, to see how he uses language. And what he found is that Irenaeus never used Exodus to mean death. Every time he uses Exodus, he means departure. Whenever he talks about death, he always uses the standard word thanatos. So if Irenaeus doesn't use Exodus for death elsewhere, he didn't use it for death here. He was talking about the departure. And so suddenly we see that there's not a contradiction in the patristic testimony here, the testimony of the church fathers. They dovetail together perfectly.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part tomorrow. Same time and same place. If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.